The key to everything is to see the mind's absolute or final statements about the world as what they actually are, which is not final and not absolute at all. Nobody or nothing can make absolute stroke final statements about the world. The world isn't that kind of a thing, or reality isn't that kind of a thing. Final abstract statements only belong to the abstract world, which is the world of our intellectual imagination, so to speak. So once we are actually aware of what thought is doing, just to recap on this basic principle, then what we're doing, we're seeing that thought is making apparently absolute statements that are actually provisional, but it's not letting on that they're provisional. Just as any literal statement doesn't let on that it's not actually literally true. Because if a literal statement ever did that, which obviously it can't, it wouldn't be a literal statement anymore, to be a metaphor. So we could say, echoing Joseph Campbell in a sort of a way, that literal statements are a special case of metaphor. They're metaphors which pretend not to be metaphors. So they're fooling us, in other words, which is the way that they work. It's perfectly okay for them to try to fool us because that's the name of the game, so to speak. We can't blame thoughts for that. The point is not to be fooled. The point is not to get fooled again, or to get fooled possibly less frequently if that's possible. And when we put it like this, that seems like a natural enough outlook. Who wants to keep on getting fooled? Bad enough getting fooled a few times, getting fooled the whole time. That doesn't feel great. It doesn't sound great. So the key to everything is not getting fooled. But we can't rely on thought to help us out there, because its job as the adversary, in inverted commas, not that I mean anything particularly sinister about that, it's just a way of understanding our relationship to thought. That its job is to try and trick us, and our job, so to speak, is to not get tricked. So that's simple enough to explain. It's reasonably simple to explain. And that's all there is to it. There's no further bits and pieces we need to add to that principle. That's it. In its completion. And yet there is a difficulty, though, that we might not immediately be aware of, that might not dawn on us. And the difficulty is that although we don't like being fooled in a dysphoria-producing way, we do like being fooled in the other way, which is the euphoria-producing way. So in other words, we don't like being insulted. Who likes being insulted? But we do like being flattered. So our dislike of being insulted is exactly the same thing as our fondness for being flattered. There aren't two things going on there, but just the one thing. So the day that I no longer care about being flattered is also the day that I no longer care about being insulted. And the reason I'm talking about being insulted and being flattered is because that's the two ways that the mind gets it in its power, and both ways work equally well. So when the thinking mind hits me with final statements, absolute statements that make me feel bad, needless to say, that doesn't seem great to me, and I'm not really getting any benefit from that, and I know I'm not getting any benefit from it. So as far as this process of bringing awareness to the provisional nature of thought statements goes, that might seem like an excellent idea, because if I don't take the insult to heart, it's just mere words. It's nothing. So it really does seem like a good idea to work with thinking in the sense that I see through the apparently final nature of thought statements. But then the other side of the coin is that I like those final statements which make me feel good or make me feel secure. I'm very fond of those. So I want to have my cake and eat it in a kind of a way. I want to have the euphoria producing side of the deal without the suffering producing side of the deal. And in this obstinate way, I keep on hoping for that and working for that. It's like trying to wish that you can win all the time and never lose. So you keep on playing the game because it's like a gambler who keeps on gambling because they think one day the big win's going to come and that'll make it all okay. So we're all gamblers and we're all hoping for the big win, and we're all imagining in this ludicrous way that we can have the euphoria producing final statements. Everything's great, or I'm great, or things are going to work out well, but not the flip side of that. So it is exactly this stubbornness that keeps us trapped in the game. The same way that when I become an out and out gambling addict, I can never see that I'm not going to win. I won't let myself see that. I keep imagining that it's all going to come good for me. When we look into what's going on when we're thinking, we can see that rather a lot of our thinking, even if only on a very small scale, is euphoria producing, little thoughts that make us feel better in some way. And we're rather like sheep or cows grazing in a field. And during the course of the day, we're grazing upon these euphoria producing thoughts. And this doesn't necessarily mean that the thoughts are actually boosting me into a state of manic elation because I suddenly imagine that I have superpowers or that I have some fantastic destiny, or that I'm just like exactly like a hero or a superhuman type person. When it gets like that, it's very noticeable. But what we're talking about is the very, very minor little thoughts that we have that just kind of massage us and just flatter us in a very low-key way, so we don't even notice it happening. Little things that we think, that's something good, without even thinking that. We don't be aware enough of the process to think about it. So it's fair enough, probably fair enough to say most of us go through the day much like herbivores grazing upon euphoria producing thoughts. In other words, we're in the market for them. Being in the market for them means that we're unconscious though, because the absolutely only way this is going to work is if I do not see the provisional nature of thought statements. They have to be truths for me to get a euphoric lift, or for me to get a feeling of security. That means I have to cultivate, if that's the right word, it probably isn't, the absence of awareness rather than awareness. So instead of cultivating awareness, I have to get rid of my awareness if I am to enjoy the euphoria producing thoughts. And another way of putting that is to say that I have to get rid of perspective. So when we're in the unconscious mode, as it is said, then we're so up close to the thinking that there's no perspective to see that the thinking is the thinking. So the thinking produces statements, and we react to those statements as if we are reacting to reality itself. So reality's gone, and there's this thinking machine instead hitting us with various final statements which directly corresponds to Jean Baudrillard's world or realm of the hyperreal. The image has replaced the thing. The menu has replaced the meal. The thought has replaced the reality. And so that's a kind of a cheat, because we can get our good feelings from a thought of a good thing, or a thought of some kind of benefit, or a thought of whatever, rather than getting a good feeling out of reality. So that's a cheat. And when we cheat, it can work out good for us in the short term, but it's never going to get us anywhere, because we're not putting in the work. Cheats can prosper, but only on a short-term basis. There is no way to cheat reality, and it's pretty silly if we think we can. We're kind of fools if we think we can cheat reality. Reality is reality after all. We'd be better off playing straight with it. Not that we ever consciously work out this strategy or know what we're doing, we just kind of get sucked into it because of the immediate and easy reward of euphoria producing thoughts or security producing thoughts. So then, once we've lost all perspective, we're at the mercy of both types of thoughts, which are really just thoughts. They're not really two different types of thoughts, they're just final statements. And we're completely trapped in a world which isn't real, and which will sometimes make us feel euphoric and sometimes make us dysphoric. And this is a null world, which is to say, when we actually look at it, there's nothing in it at all. If you look at a little bit of it, you might say, oh, there's a euphoric kind of a peak. But every euphoric peak corresponds to a dysphoric trough. And so the world that's created by thought is completely and utterly null. You could spend an eternity in it and you'd come out with nothing. You wouldn't have learned anything or had any genuinely meaningful experiences. You wouldn't have changed in any way. You come out of that with absolutely nothing. It's like dreaming you're a king or a super rich person, and then waking up to discover you're in the gutter still. So it corresponds to fantasy, I suppose. The null world corresponds to fantasy. Now, the point is that it's fair enough to say most of us are never really unhappy enough to move away from this, because we continue not seeing that the thought-created world is a null world. And in fact, we don't see that the thought-created world is the world, isn't the world. We don't see that the null world is null, and we don't see that the thought-created world is only the thought-created world and not the real world. So in that case, we get on the best we can. But if it were to happen, and this is on the cards as well, so it's on the cards that we will stay content with this unsatisfactory state of affairs, so that's on the cards, but it's also on the cards that sometimes we will be not satisfied with this unsatisfactory state of affairs. And in that case, we will have an interest in seeing beyond it, seeing beyond final statements, seeing beyond the finite game, as James Cass calls it. And so when we have an interest, that means we will be interested in seeing that the final descriptions of reality that creates dysphoria are not final at all, but purely provisional or arbitrary. And also at the same time have an interest in seeing that the euphoria producing thoughts are only thoughts as well. So our interest is even. It's not that we're only interested in getting away from the negative, but we want to keep the positive. So at that point, when our interest is even, and we don't drop everything in our enjoyment of having euphoric thoughts, and then forget about everything and go straight back into the unconscious state again, as soon as the thoughts start flattering us instead of insulting us. So if we're equally immune to some kind of degree to both flattery and insults, then that is the point at which we start seeing through the whole thing. In the Eastern metaphysical language with which we have become familiar with in the West, this means dropping attachments or becoming less detached. And attachment is really attachment in the positive sense to euphoria, and attachment in the negative or I want to get away from it sense to dysphoria. So that's what becoming detached means. We very much tend to not really get the hang of this, because we think of detachment as a sense of becoming cold and somehow emotionally non-engaged. And this is a point that's been made lots of times, but just to make it again. So we kind of imagine that non-attachment means that we will end up like Mr. Spock in the original Star Trek's show, who other crew members take the piss out of because he doesn't have any emotions. He just always looks the same. So we often say, or people would say, often enough, well, I don't want to be like that. I want to have the thrills and the spills and the ups and the downs. Because that's what it means to be a human being, basically. To feel good and to feel bad, and not to be afraid of these things. But this is not understanding the nature of attachment at all. That's missing the point in a big way. Because it's not as if we're relating honestly to reality at all, and that we're feeling good because of what happens, or feeling bad because of some other thing that happens, and therefore we're wholeheartedly emotionally engaged. It's not like that at all, because what we're engaging with is our own descriptions of the world, or ideas about the world, or beliefs about the world. So if I'm attached, I'm engaging with my final descriptions of the world. So I like the final descriptions of the world that are favourable to me and I feel good, and I hate the ones that are unfavourable to me and make me feel bad. So really that is in no way does that involve me relating to reality or having a relationship in any way to reality. It's, on the contrary, it's a thoroughly undignified state of affairs where I'm going up and down and up and down. Every time the mind provides me with a flashcard that has one effect or the other. So you can imagine having a friend, obviously not really much of a friend, but imagine having a friend who 1 minute says to you, "Hey buddy, everything's going to be great," and then your spirits soar, and then 2 minutes later he'll say, "Oh buddy, you're screwed," and then your spirits hit the gutter, hit rock bottom, and then you'll say something good, and then you'll say something bad, and he'll talk you up and talk you down, and none of it means a damn really. And that's what thought does. Every little thing it either seizes upon it as an advantage, which is its view of an advantage, its final description or view of this some event as being, this is really good news for you, even though it isn't, because we don't know what it leads on to or what lies behind it, because it's not possible to know, as Alan Watts points out, and which is the point of the story of the Chinese farmer, which you may be familiar with or maybe not. I'll try and put a link to it. So the point of this story is that normally if something had happened and we think, oh, that's great, and so we're actually jumping to the conclusion that this means everything's going to be good from now on. But what we think would be great could just as easily turn out to be bad news later on. And then that bad news later on, maybe that could lead to something that's actually helpful to us. So we never know, because life is an ongoing, unpredictable unfolding. And so it's pointless trying to slap these labels of, that's a good thing for me, or oh, that's a bad thing for me, because we just don't know. So any emotional reactions or euphoric, dysphoric reactions based on me guessing, pretending that I know something that I don't know, or fooling myself into thinking that I know something that I don't know. And then we spend our whole time going up and down in this undignified way, and none of it has any relationship to anything other than the tendency of the mind to jump to conclusions, and jump to conclusions that are necessarily false, because all conclusions are false, because there's never any conclusion. Things don't conclude. The mind concludes, because the mind is a closed thing. It's a closed system, a closed shop. Reality is not like that. It has a totally different quality. Nothing is final. Nothing is concluded. And in one way, we might think you'd expect that we would see that as a good thing, because if we could see that nature of reality, you wouldn't get trapped in the mind's finalities. And it would be a good thing, with the one proviso that there's something we're hanging on to the whole time, that we really don't want to give up. And that something that we are holding on to the whole time without realizing it is our final view of who we are, which, if we were to see through the mind's final statements, we'd also be seeing through this idea that we have of who we are or what we are. And on some, as I just said, on some very deep level, we really, really don't want to do that, because that's the ultimate existential risk. Okay, thanks for watching.